The kitchen at Riverside State Correctional smelled like every institutional kitchen Marcus Chef had ever avoided in his former life. Overcooked vegetables, bleach that couldn't quite mask the underlying rot, steam that carried more desperation than heat. But after 12 days behind these walls, it was the closest thing to sanctuary he'd found. Marcus moved through the prep station with the muscle memory of 25 years. His hands, softer now than they'd been in his prime, still knew how to julienne an onion in under 30 seconds. The other inmates watched him with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. A chef didn't belong here. Then again, nobody really did. "Yo, chef!" Danny, a 23-year-old kid with gang tattoos he probably regretted, nodded from the dish station. "Brennan's looking for you." Officer Brennan. Marcus had learned the hierarchy fast. In Riverside, the guards weren't your protectors. They were just another faction in a place where everything operated on transactions you couldn't see but definitely felt. Brennan had dead eyes and a smile that never reached them. The kind of man who'd found his calling in a place where cruelty wore a uniform. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward the office adjacent to the main kitchen. Through the reinforced glass, he could see Brennan leaning against a desk, talking to someone Marcus couldn't quite make out. The way Brennan's shoulders were angled, relaxed but purposeful, reminded Marcus of a shark circling something it had already decided to eat. "Chef." Brennan's voice carried that false casualness that made Marcus's jaw tighten. "Got a minute?" It wasn't a question. Marcus stepped into the office. The fluorescent light flickered, casting shadows that made Brennan's face look even more predatory. Sitting in the corner, arms crossed, was Ricky Torres. Everyone called him the Shark, though never to his face unless you were in his crew. Torres ran C Block, and his reach extended into every profitable corner of Riverside. Commissary, phones, protection, and apparently, kitchen assignments. "Mr. Chef." Torres smiled, showing teeth that had been fixed with money that didn't come from legitimate sources. "Heard you used to run some fancy place in Columbus." "That true?" Marcus kept his face neutral. In his former life, he'd dealt with health inspectors, investors, and food critics who could destroy a restaurant with a single review. He understood power dynamics, how to read a room, when to speak, and when silence said more. "I cooked," Marcus said simply. "Modest." Torres chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "See, that's what I like about you. You keep your head down. Do your work. But here's the thing, Chef. This kitchen job, it's a privilege. Means you're not out there breaking rocks or scrubbing toilets. Means you got it pretty comfortable." There it was, the hook before the line. Brennan shifted his weight, and Marcus caught the movement in his peripheral vision. Two predators. One prey. This wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. And Marcus's mind began working through the angles like he was breaking down a complicated recipe. Identify the ingredients. Understand their properties. Anticipate how they'll react under pressure. "I appreciate the opportunity," Marcus said carefully. "That's good. Real good." Torres stood, and despite being 3 inches shorter than Marcus, he somehow filled more space. "Because I got a guy, Luis, good worker, loyal. And I think he'd be real good in this kitchen. Better than good, actually. Essential." Marcus said nothing. In the silence, he heard the hum of the walk-in cooler, the distant clang of metal trays, the muffled shouts from the yard outside. This was how it happened. Not with violence, not yet, but with the slow, inevitable pressure of a system designed to crush anyone who didn't bend. "Problem is," Brennan interjected, his voice carrying that bureaucratic smoothness that made Marcus's stomach turn, "we've been having some issues." security issues, contraband getting into places it shouldn't. Marcus's pulse didn't change, but something cold settled in his chest. He'd seen this movie before. Different setting, same script. The kitchen's a sensitive area, Brennan continued, pulling out a clipboard like he was discussing nothing more serious than a maintenance schedule. Lots of supplies coming in and out. Easy place for things to slip through, if you know what I mean. Torres smiled again. Now, I'm not saying you're involved in anything, Chef, but perception matters in here. And if something were to turn up, if somebody were to find something they shouldn't in, say, your workstation. He shrugged, the gesture almost sympathetic. Well, that'd be real unfortunate. There it was. The threat, dressed up in hypotheticals and concern. Marcus's mind catalogued every detail. The way Torres's left hand kept returning to his pocket. Brennan's position blocking the door. The camera in the corner that had been broken since Marcus's first day in the kitchen. This wasn't improvised. This was choreographed. I understand, Marcus said, his voice steady. Good man. Brennan clapped him on the shoulder with false camaraderie. Glad we could have this talk. You're a smart guy, Chef. Smart guys know when to adapt. Marcus returned to the prep station, his movements as measured as always. Danny glanced at him, started to speak, then thought better of it. The kid had survived this place by learning when to be invisible. Marcus couldn't blame him. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine. Dice the potatoes. Season the meat. Plate the trays that would feed 400 men who saw every meal as either currency or insult. Marcus's hands moved automatically while his mind worked through scenarios. He'd spent his entire career anticipating problems, planning for contingencies, staying 3 steps ahead of health codes and supply chain issues and the 1,000 small disasters that could destroy a restaurant. This was no different, just higher stakes. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the kitchen at 6 a.m., same as always. The pre-dawn light barely penetrated the high windows, leaving the space in that gray twilight that made everything look like a film negative. He moved to his station, reaching for his apron on its usual hook. It wasn't there. Officer Brennan stood near the supply closet, arms folded, wearing an expression of practiced concern. 2 other guards flanked him. Torres leaned against the wall, watching with the satisfied patience of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. Chef, Brennan's voice carried across the kitchen. Need you to step over here. Marcus's stomach dropped, but his face remained impassive. He walked toward them, each step measured, controlled. This was it, the frame. The inevitable conclusion of yesterday's conversation dressed up as policy and procedure. We got a tip, Brennan said, pulling on latex gloves with theatrical precision. Anonymous, about possible contraband in the kitchen. You understand we have to check these things out, right? Security protocol. Of course, Marcus said. Brennan opened Marcus's locker, the one he'd been assigned 2 weeks ago, the one with a lock the administration had provided, the one that could be opened by any guard with a master key. The officer pulled out Marcus's work boots, reached inside the left one, and withdrew a small plastic bag filled with white pills. Marcus felt as if he'd been punched in the gut the moment he saw the small bag filled with white pills. He'd known this was coming, had seen it approaching like a storm on the horizon, but the reality of it still stole his breath. 25 years of building a reputation, of working 16-hour days, of earning Michelin considerations and James Beard nominations, reduced to this moment. Marcus was right in the middle of a cunning plot against him. Well, shit, Brennan said, his voice dripping with false disappointment. Looks like we got a problem, Chef. Torres pushed off the wall, walking closer with that predator's grace. "Damn shame, Chef. Real shame. I warned you about perception, didn't I?" The other inmates had stopped working, watching with the hollow-eyed awareness of men who'd seen this play out 100 times. No one would speak up. No one could afford to. This was Riverside. This was how the system worked. "These aren't mine," Marcus said quietly. "Yeah." Brennan sealed the bag, tagged it with practiced efficiency. "They never are." Within 20 minutes, Marcus was in segregation. The hole, whatever you wanted to call the 8x10 concrete box where they put you when you'd become inconvenient. The door slammed shut, with a finality that reminded him of a walk-in cooler ceiling, locking in whatever was inside. Marcus sat on the thin mattress and let himself feel it. The rage, the injustice, the absolute crystal-clear understanding that he'd been set up by men who'd done this before and would do it again because the system protected them. But something else crystallized in that moment. Something cold and patient and utterly focused. They'd made a mistake. Not in framing him. That had worked perfectly. Their mistake was assuming that because Marcus was calm, because he was measured, because he'd spent his life in kitchens instead of streets, he would simply break. That he'd accept this and fade into whatever hole they'd prepared for him. They didn't understand what it took to run a kitchen. The precision, the planning, the absolute requirement to think 10 steps ahead because one mistake, one miscalculation, could burn down everything you'd built. Marcus closed his eyes and began to cook. Not food, something else. Something that required different ingredients, but the same fundamental principles. Patience, observation, timing, and a very clear understanding of what happened when you applied the right amount of heat to the right pressure points. 3 days in segregation taught Marcus more about Riverside than 2 weeks in general population ever could. Seg was where the system showed its bones. No pretense, no performance. Just the raw mechanics of power wielded by men who'd learned that cruelty was easier than competence. The guards who brought meals were different from Brennan. Younger, mostly. A few looked uncomfortable with the whole arrangement, but discomfort wasn't the same as conscience. They did their jobs and didn't make eye contact. Marcus used the time. In a kitchen, idle moments were just preparation in disguise. Mise en place. Everything in its place. He began constructing a mental map of Riverside's invisible infrastructure. The patterns he'd noticed, but not fully registered. How certain inmates moved through the facility with a confidence that suggested immunity. How supplies arrived on Tuesdays, but inventory was done Fridays, leaving a 3-day window where discrepancies could be smoothed over. How Brennan worked the evening shift, when administration had gone home and oversight became theoretical. The smuggling operation Torres had obliquely referenced wasn't small-scale. You didn't frame someone and burn a valuable kitchen asset over a few pills. This was organized, systematic, which meant it had patterns, vulnerabilities, weak points where the wrong kind of pressure could cause the whole thing to collapse. On the 4th day, Marcus was sent back to his cell with an official warning and the loss of his kitchen privileges. No charges filed, because filing charges meant investigations, and investigations meant questions people like Brennan couldn't afford. Torres had gotten what he wanted. Luis now worked the prep station where Marcus used to stand. The Mexican kid looked nervous, out of his depth, but he was Torres's man, which meant he was protected. The rest of the kitchen staff avoided Marcus's eyes when he walked past, heading to his new assignment. Laundry detail. The laundry room was a concrete cave of industrial washers and dryers, steam and noise, and the kind of heat that made Marcus's gray hair stick to his forehead. It was meant to be punishment, a clear message about the cost of not bending. But Marcus had spent his entire career in hot, loud, chaotic environments, had learned to think clearly while the world around him screamed. This was just another kitchen. Different tools, same principles. And the laundry had something the kitchen didn't: visibility into the entire facility's routines. Every day, Marcus processed sheets and uniforms from every unit: medical, administration, the guard's locker room. And as he worked, he watched, noted patterns, saw things that didn't quite add up, like how certain inmates' uniforms came back with pockets that had clearly held more than regulation items, how guard uniforms sometimes smelled like cigarette smoke in a non-smoking facility, suggesting off-book break areas where transactions could happen unsupervised, how the supply requisitions he glimpsed when collecting laundry from the quartermaster's office showed discrepancies between what was ordered and what was recorded as received. People thought silence meant submission. They were wrong. Silence was just focused attention. Marcus befriended Carlos, the 60-year-old lifer who'd run laundry for 15 years and knew more about Riverside than the warden. Carlos had the kind of institutional wisdom that came from watching regimes rise and fall, learning that the only way to survive was to become essential without becoming threatening. "You're asking a lot of questions for a guy who just lost a primo job," Carlos said one afternoon, his weathered face creased with something between amusement and concern. "Just trying to understand how things work," Marcus replied, folding a guard's uniform with the same precision he'd once used for napkins at his restaurant. "Things work the same way everywhere, hermano. Follow the money." "And the money here goes where?" Carlos gave him a long look, the kind that assessed risk and potential reward. "You seem like a smart guy, Marcus. Smart enough to know that some questions get people hurt." "I'm already hurt." "Yeah, but there's hurt, and then there's disappeared." "Torres doesn't play." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the warning. But he'd already made his decision back in that segregation cell. The only question was methodology. That night, lying on his bunk while his cellmate snored, Marcus stared at the ceiling and let his mind work through the problem like he was planning a tasting menu. You couldn't just throw ingredients together and hope they worked. You needed structure, progression, each course building on the last, creating a narrative that moved toward an inevitable conclusion. Course 1, observation. Learn the operation's full scope. Course 2, documentation. Gather evidence. Course 3, leverage. Find the weak point. Course 4, execution. Apply pressure. Course 5, service. Watch it all collapse. The next morning, Marcus began in earnest. The laundry gave him access, but he needed more. He needed to understand the supply chain, how contraband entered the facility, who facilitated it, where the money went, and most importantly, who else knew about it, because an operation this sophisticated required institutional complicity beyond one corrupt guard. Marcus started with the obvious. Medical was the source of the pills he'd been framed with. Pharmaceutical inventory in a prison was supposed to be locked down tighter than the armory, but supposed to be, and actually is, were different things. The nurse who collected medical laundry was in her 50s, tired, and clearly done with Riverside's particular brand of exhaustion. "Must be tough," Marcus said conversationally, checking sheets for bloodstains that needed special treatment. "Managing all those medications. Lot of responsibility." She snorted. "You have no idea. Half the inventory systems don't talk to each other. We get shipments that don't match the orders. Then we get audited, like it's our fault the system's held together with duct tape and prayers. Sounds like every kitchen I ever worked in. Records never matching reality." She smiled, recognizing a fellow veteran of bureaucratic dysfunction. Exactly. And God forbid you report the discrepancies. Then it's your problem to explain. So what do you do? What everyone does: adjust the numbers so they work. It's not like we're diverting anything serious. Just making the paperwork match the reality, you know? Marcus nodded sympathetically, filing away every word. The nurses weren't stealing the medications, but they were covering for discrepancies they didn't cause, which meant someone else was. And they'd learned not to ask questions because asking questions made you responsible. Perfect institutional corruption. Not through active participation, but through learned helplessness and exhaustion. Over the following week, Marcus pieced together the operation's architecture. It was beautiful in its simplicity, really. The kind of elegant solution any good chef would appreciate. Medications came in on Tuesday shipments. Brennan worked evening shift on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On those nights, he'd supervise the transfer of supplies to medical, the commissary, and the kitchen. 3 areas with high-value inventory. Somewhere in that transfer, quantities got adjusted. Pills disappeared. The nurses, overworked and understaffed, adjusted their logs to match what they'd actually received, never realizing they were documenting theft. The contraband moved through the kitchen because food supplies were the least scrutinized shipments. Who checks how many onions arrived? Torres's people in the kitchen redistributed the smuggled items, and the inmates who couldn't pay in cash paid in other ways. Commissary accounts, work assignments, protection. It was a closed loop, self-sustaining, profitable, and it required multiple points of failure to collapse. Marcus realized he couldn't just expose Brennan. He needed to document the entire chain, prove it was systematic, make it too big to contain. That's when he spotted his opening. The warden, Hayes, was coming up on retirement. 6 months out, according to the gossip Marcus picked up during yard time. Hayes was the kind of administrator who'd spent 30 years learning that fighting the system was less profitable than managing it. But retirement changed calculations. Legacy mattered. No one wanted their final act to be presiding over a scandal that made national news. Marcus began collecting evidence. Not physical evidence. That would get him killed. Memory evidence, dates, times, patterns. The kind of detailed observations that made sense only when assembled into a larger picture. He befriended Jimmy, a guard who worked intake. Jimmy was young, idealistic, still believed the job was about rehabilitation. The kind of guard who'd last maybe 2 more years before cynicism or conscience drove him out. "Ever notice," Marcus asked during a conversation in the yard, "how certain inmates seem to get commissary access beyond what their accounts should allow?" Jimmy frowned. "I've wondered about that." "System glitches," I figured. "Yeah. Funny how those glitches always seem to benefit the same people." He planted small seeds of doubt and curiosity, tiny ones that would sprout in the minds not yet fully corrupted by Riverside's decay. Not enough to make anyone openly question motives, but just enough for them to remember when the time came. Enough for them to notice. The little seeds of doubt and curiosity he had sown in untainted minds would one day take root and bear fruit. And those fruits would be enough to bring down the rotten system itself. Marcus was 2 months in now. The initial shock of the frame-up had faded, replaced by something colder and more focused. Every morning in the laundry, every conversation, every observed pattern added another ingredient to the dish he was preparing. Torres noticed him occasionally, always with that shark smile that said he'd won. Brennan ignored him entirely, which was its own kind of dismissal. Luis struggled in the kitchen, constantly behind, stressed, making mistakes that would have gotten Marcus written up, but somehow slid for Torres's man. They thought Marcus was broken, neutralized, just another inmate who'd learned his place. They had no idea he was still cooking, just a different recipe than they expected. A cold meal of revenge. The break came from an unexpected source. Danny, the young kid from the kitchen. Marcus was folding laundry when Danny appeared, ostensibly dropping off kitchen linens. His hands shook slightly as he placed the bag on the counter. "Luis is drowning," Danny said quietly, not looking at Marcus. "Torres keeps pushing more through and Luis can't handle the volume. He's panicking, making mistakes." Marcus kept folding, his expression unchanged. "Not my problem anymore." "Yeah, but—" Danny glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "He's getting sloppy." Yesterday, Brennan had to step in personally when a shipment almost got flagged. They're worried, and when Torres gets worried, people get hurt. There it was. The crack in the foundation. Any operation ran smoothly, only as long as every component functioned properly. Replace a skilled operator with a loyal but incompetent one, and the whole system destabilized. Torres had chosen loyalty over competence, and now the machine was starting to grind. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. Danny's jaw tightened. "Because you didn't deserve what happened. And because I'm tired of pretending this place runs on anything but bullshit and fear." Marcus studied the kid, saw the same frustration he'd seen in young line cooks who'd realized the industry they'd romanticized was built on exploitation and broken promises. Danny was approaching a decision point: become complicit or find a way out. "If you're tired of it," Marcus said carefully, "maybe it's time someone documented what's actually happening." Danny met his eyes. Understanding passed between them. Over the next week, Danny became Marcus's eyes in the kitchen. Every movement of contraband. Every time Brennan lingered near the supply closet. Every moment Luis panicked, and Torres had to intervene personally. Danny memorized it all, then relayed it during laundry drop-offs. Marcus assembled the timeline with the precision of a chef perfecting a recipe. Tuesday, 6:30 p.m., medical shipment arrives. Brennan supervises transfer. By 8 p.m., discrepancies logged by nursing staff. Thursday, same pattern. The kitchen received supplies Friday mornings, always overseer by Brennan's crew, never by administration. But Marcus needed more than pattern recognition. He needed proof that would force action from someone with the authority to act. That someone was Warden Hayes. Hayes was a bureaucrat, not a crusader. But he was also 6 months from retirement with a pension to protect. The last thing he wanted was a scandal that would follow him into civilian life. Marcus needed to present the corruption not as a moral failing, but as a liability Hayes couldn't afford to ignore. The opportunity came during a facility-wide inventory audit announced by the state. Mandatory. Comprehensive. The kind of review that happened every 3 years and made everyone nervous. Marcus watched Torres's operation go into overdrive, trying to clean up loose ends before auditors arrived. Excess inventory disappeared. Numbers were frantically adjusted. Brennan worked double shifts, his dead eyes now carrying an edge of something that looked almost like panic. Desperation made people careless. On the second day of the audit, Marcus requested a meeting with Warden Hayes. Inmates could file grievances and requests through official channels. Most got ignored, but the right to petition existed on paper. Marcus used it. Hayes's assistant, a woman in her 40s who looked like she'd given up fighting Riverside's dysfunction years ago, seemed surprised when Marcus appeared in administration. "Your chef? The chef who got busted for contraband?" "That's me," Marcus said calmly. "I need 5 minutes of the warden's time. It's regarding the current inventory audit." She started to dismiss him, then paused. Something in Marcus's demeanor, the calm certainty, the lack of desperation, made her reconsider. Wait here. 10 minutes later, Marcus sat across from Warden Hayes in an office that tried too hard to project authority. Framed commendations on the walls, a desk clear of everything except a computer and a nameplate. Hayes himself looked like a man counting days, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent decades managing human misery. "Mr. Chef," Hayes said, his tone suggesting this was already a waste of time. "What can I do for you?" "Warden, I was framed for contraband possession 2 months ago. Lost my kitchen assignment as a result. I didn't request this meeting to protest that decision." Hayes's eyebrows rose slightly. "Then why are you here?" "Because the large smuggling operation hidden here will be uncovered during this inspection. And when it is uncovered, it will be a major headache for you." Hayes's expression didn't change, but his stance did. His attention sharpened. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, sir, it is." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Medical inventory discrepancies on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, corresponding with Officer Brennan's shift. Kitchen supply overages that disappear between delivery and inventory. Commissary accounts showing purchases beyond what inmates' funds should allow. It's systematic, it's organized, and it's about to become very visible." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "You have proof of this?" "I have patterns, dates, times, names, enough that if you direct the auditors to look at specific areas, they'll find what they need to find." Marcus kept his voice level, professional. "I'm not asking for justice, Warden. I'm giving you advance warning so you can control how this surfaces. Better to discover it yourself during an audit than have the state auditors hand you a report that makes you look complicit." It was the right approach. Hayes wasn't interested in right and wrong. He was interested in managing perception and protecting his exit strategy. "Why should I believe you?" Hayes asked, but the question lacked real skepticism. He was already calculating. "Because I have nothing to gain by lying, and you have everything to lose by ignoring me. If I'm wrong, you've wasted some auditor time. If I'm right, and you don't act, you'll be left under an accusation that will never let you go." Hayes picked up his phone. "Send in the audit supervisor." What happened next unfolded with the inevitability of a perfectly timed reduction sauce. Once you applied the right heat to the right ingredients, chemistry took over. The auditors, directed to specific areas by Hayes, found exactly what Marcus had predicted. Medical inventory showed systematic discrepancies that nursing staff had been covering for months, unaware they were documenting theft. Kitchen supply records revealed a pattern of overages that coincided with Brennan's supervision. Commissary accounts exposed transactions that violated every facility regulation. Hayes moved fast. He called in the State Corrections Oversight Board before Torres or Brennan fully understood what was happening. By the time they realized the audit had shifted from routine to investigation, it was too late to cover tracks. Brennan was arrested on facility grounds. The dead-eyed guard who'd wielded power through intimidation and corruption left in handcuffs, his face finally showing something other than smug certainty: fear. Torres was harder to touch directly. He was smart enough to maintain distance from the physical evidence, but his protection network collapsed without Brennan. Other inmates, sensing the power shift, started talking. Deals were made. Names were given. Within a week, Torres was transferred to administrative segregation pending federal charges for running a criminal enterprise within the facility. Marcus watched it unfold from the laundry room, his expression never changing. Danny brought updates, his voice carrying the slightly odd tone of someone watching a carefully constructed world dismantle itself. They're saying you orchestrated the whole thing, Danny said, that you played Torres and Brennan from the beginning. I just told the truth at the right time, Marcus replied, folding a guard's uniform with the same precision he'd once used for napkins. Man, that's cold. They tried to destroy you and you just waited. Watched them hang themselves. Marcus thought about that. About the nights in segregation when rage had threatened to consume him. About the choice he'd made to channel that rage into something colder and more precise. About the understanding that revenge wasn't about violence. It was about patience and pressure applied to the right weak points. In a kitchen, Marcus said quietly, "Timing is everything. Act too fast, and you ruin the dish. But wait for the exact right moment. Apply the exact right heat, and ingredients transform themselves." 3 days later, Marcus was called back to administration. Hayes sat behind his desk, looking simultaneously relieved and exhausted. "The State Board is recommending I extend my tenure another year to oversee reforms," Hayes said, his tone suggesting this was the opposite of good news. "They're implementing new inventory controls, rotating guard assignments, and conducting quarterly audits. Congratulations, Mr. Chef. You've made everyone's life more difficult." "I'm sure you'll manage, Warden," Hayes almost smiled. "Your kitchen position is available again, if you want it. Luis requested transfer to maintenance, says he's not suited for food service." Marcus considered the offer. The kitchen had been sanctuary once, could be again. But something had shifted in him during those months. He'd proven to himself that the skills that had made him successful outside these walls, observation, planning, patience, precision, worked just as well inside them. "I'll take it," Marcus said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank the fact that you saved me from retiring as the warden who presided over the biggest corrections scandal in state history." Hayes leaned back in his chair. "Off the record? What you did was dangerous. If Torres had figured out what you were doing before the audit—" "He didn't," Marcus said simply, "because he made the same mistake everyone makes." He assumed silence meant defeat. Back in the kitchen, Marcus tied on his apron and surveyed the space. It looked the same, but everything had changed. The other inmates watched him differently now. Not with fear, Marcus had never sought that, but with something closer to understanding. He'd been crushed by the system and had found a way to not just survive, but win. Danny worked the dish station, grinning. "Welcome back, Chef." "Thanks." Marcus began prepping for the evening meal, his hands falling into familiar rhythms. Julienne, the onions. Season the meat. Build each component with care and precision. Officer Jimmy, the young idealistic guard, stopped by the kitchen door. "Heard you're back. Glad things worked out." "Me too," Marcus said. As Jimmy walked away, Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. Things had indeed worked out. Not through violence or confrontation, but through the patient application of observation and strategic pressure. He'd cooked a meal Torres and Brennan hadn't even realized they were eating until they'd consumed every bite. The kitchen hummed with activity. Steam rose from industrial pots. The rhythm of chopping and stirring filled the space. And Marcus Chef, 48 years old, gray-haired and slightly overweight, worked his station with the calm certainty of a man who'd learned that sometimes the most devastating thing you could do to your enemies was simply outlast them.